You know, it's hard to ignore the headlines lately. It feels like we're constantly seeing news about helicopter crashes.
Hmm.
From the terrible accident with Kobe Bryant a few years back to more recent ones, like over the Hudson River.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are helicopters just, I don't know, inherently riskier than jumping on a commercial flight?
That's exactly the question we want to dig into today. You're right. Those events, they grab your attention, and it's totally natural to feel a bit uneasy.
Yeah.
So our goal here is to move past just the headlines and look at the facts, the data. We'll be comparing safety records, helicopters versus commercial planes,
Right.
using accident reports, stats, trying to give a clearer picture of the actual risks involved.
Absolutely. And while, look, you can't ignore the emotional side. I mean, the whole world mourned Kobe Bryant. Those tributes really hit home about the human cost.
For sure.
But we want to shift focus now, get more into the data, the facts about helicopter safety. Okay, so where should we start? Maybe that Kobe Bryant crash. Calabasas, 2020.
Yeah, good place to start. That crash tragically took the lives of Kobe, his daughter, and 7 others. It involved a Sikorsky S-76B helicopter
Right.
operated by a company called Island Express Helicopters, Inc. And the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, they did a really thorough investigation.
I remember they moved the wreckage and everything.
Exactly. Took it all the way to Phoenix for a detailed look.
And didn't something come out pretty quickly about their certification? Like Island Express wasn't certified for flying in fog at the time.
That's a crucial point, yeah. They reportedly weren't certified for what's called Instrument Flight Rules, or IFR, in those conditions.
And what does that mean, practically?
It means basically they were limited.
Yeah.
They should only have been flying when the pilot could see clearly, VFR, Visual Flight Rules. Flying without that IFR certification in bad weather, like fog,
Yeah.
that significantly limits where and when you can safely operate.
Okay.
But it's also important to note, the NTSB, after all that investigation, they determined there wasn't any, mechanical failure before the crash.
Yeah.
No pre-impact malfunction.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't the machine itself failing, which I guess leads to what they did determine was the probable cause. And this part is quite, well, sobering.
It is. They concluded the crash was most likely because the pilot decided to continue the flight under those visual rules, VFR,
Right, flying by sight.
into weather conditions that required flying by instruments, IMC, instrument meteorological conditions.
Because the visibility was just too poor.
Exactly. He kept flying visually when the weather simply didn't allow for it safely. And this, the NTSB concluded, led to spatial disorientation and ultimately a loss of control.
Spatial disorientation. That sounds terrifying and obviously incredibly dangerous. That NTSB report you mentioned, Rapid Descent into Terrain, it really painted a picture. Can you explain that feeling? What's it like for a pilot?
Well, imagine being underwater, eyes closed, and someone spins you around.
Okay.
You'd completely lose your sense of up and down, right? That's kind of a simplified analogy. But in the air, without visual cues like the horizon, a pilot's senses can get totally confused about the aircraft's attitude, like, are they banking, climbing, descending? Which way are they even moving?
Wow.
The NTSB report strongly suggests that this kind of disorientation of a major factor in why the pilot couldn't maintain control.
But he was talking to air traffic control, wasn't he? He asked for special clearance, reported cloud tops. Does that mean he knew things were getting bad?
It suggests he was definitely aware the weather was deteriorating, yes. Requesting that SVFR, Special Visual Flight Rules clearance, shows he was trying to navigate the situation.
Okay.
But, reporting he intended to climb above the clouds, and then moments later, that very sudden, rapid descent. It strongly points to him entering those instrument conditions, likely experiencing that spatial disorientation, and then struggling, fatally, to regain control.
It's just a horrible scenario. Okay, let's shift focus a bit. The Hudson River. For our listeners, especially maybe in the New York area, those helicopter crashes probably hit close to home too.
They do. And while we don't have deep dives on every single past incident right here, the 2021 crash provides some insight. You had eyewitnesses describing the helicopter, well, like it was falling apart or spinning pretty fast before hitting the water.
That sounds like a major failure, structural or something catastrophic.
It points towards that, yes.
Yeah.
Either a major structural issue or a complete loss of control in flight.
And there was a lot of chatter online about that one, right? On Reddit, places like Reviation.
Yeah, and you get some really interesting perspectives there, sometimes directly from people in the industry.
Like what?
Well, one discussion had a professional helicopter pilot, someone with a lot of experience, basically advising against riding and sightseeing helicopters.
Really? Why?
Their argument was about thin safety margins, saying that the pressure to maximize profits could lead to things like flying with minimum fuel, hiring pilots with less experience, maybe cutting corners on maintenance.
Hmm. That's concerning coming from a pilot.
It definitely makes you think about how the type of operation might impact the risk level. And we also saw comments from people identifying as former helicopter maintainers.
Okay. What was their take?
Their perspective tended to be that helicopters are just inherently less safe than airplanes.
Yeah. What's the reasoning?
Often it centers on single points of failure, meaning if one critical part breaks on a helicopter, there might not be a backup system.
Right. Unlike a plane maybe having multiple engines or control surfaces.
Exactly. And they also stress the difference in engine failure. Planes can often glide for some distance, giving the pilot option.
Huh.
Helicopters, well, they don't glide. The term auto-rotation exists, but it's a complex maneuver, not a glide.
That whole falling like a rock idea, even if it's not technically perfect, it sticks in your mind.
It does. It's a stark difference.
So, okay, we have these high-profile crashes. We have these anecdotal concerns from pilots and mechanics. This makes looking at the actual numbers, the statistics, even more important. How do helicopters stack up against commercial airplanes, safety-wise?
Right. This is where objective data is key. We looked at a big statistical analysis covering commercial aviation accidents from 1958 all the way to 2023.
And how do they measure safety?
These specific terms. A fatal accident means at least one person on board died or was seriously injured because of being in the plane, hitting it, or jet blast, not from like natural causes or suicide.
Okay.
And a whole loss accident is when the aircraft is damaged so badly it's not worth repairing. Those are the main metrics.
Got it. So what do those metrics show for commercial aviation over those decades? Fatal accidents per million flights, hull losses per million flights?
The data is incredibly clear. There's been a massive downward trend in both fatal and hull loss rates for commercial aviation since the late 50s.
So flying commercially has gotten much, much safer.
Dramatically safer. Yes, there are year-to-year fluctuations, but the overall long-term picture is one of continuous improvement. It's really a testament to better technology, stricter regulations, improved training, the whole system getting better.
That's definitely reassuring for anyone getting on a plane. How much of that is down to the planes themselves getting better, the technology?
Aircraft generation plays a huge role. Take Generation 4 aircraft think planes with advanced flight envelope protection systems.
Like the fly-by-wire systems.
Exactly. Those systems have led to something like a 90% reduction in fatal accidents caused by loss of control in flight, LOCI, compared to older Generation 3 planes.
90%. Wow.
Yeah. And these Gen 4 planes, like the Airbus A320 family, they've been flying for over 30 years now, so there's tons of data backing up the safety benefits of that tech. These systems act like a safety net, helping prevent pilots from accidentally pushing the plane beyond its safe limits.
So that tech really tackles those loss of control situations, which sound like some of the scariest scenarios. What about other types of accidents, like sliding off a runway?
Runway excursions, yeah, RAs. That's another area of focus. There's technology being introduced there too, like ROPS, runway overrun protection systems.
What does that do?
It helps pilots manage their speed and stopping distance during landing, giving them real-time calculations and warnings. The aim is to reduce those kinds of incidents as well.
Okay, so commercial aviation seems to have made huge safety leaps. Let's bring it back to helicopters then. Based on the reports, what are the main things that do contribute to helicopter accidents when they happen?
Well, looking at a GAO report on National Guard helicopter accidents, a really significant chunk of their non-combat accidents between 2012 and 2021 were put down to human error.
Human error again. Seems like a constant factor.
It really is. Things like pilots not following the established training standards, maybe being overconfident, poor communication between crew members, or just a lack of awareness of the situation or the risks involved.
And did they find issues with the training itself?
The analysis of Army National Guard accident reports definitely highlighted human error in most findings. And interestingly, yes, the GAO report mentioned that Guard pilots sometimes didn't meet the recommended monthly flying hours.
Why not?
Resource limitations were cited, which, raises questions about maintaining proficiency and consistency in training if pilots aren't getting enough regular flight time.
Makes sense. You need that constant practice. Does this apply outside the military too?
It seems like a broader issue. An older study by the IAF looked at accidents in both helicopters and transport planes from 1990 to 2000. They also found accidents happen due to skill gaps or just inadvertent mistakes, even with multiple crew members and standard operating procedures, SOPs.
So even with procedures, things go wrong. What kind of human factors did they pinpoint?
Things like inattention, not following briefings or SOPs properly, simple errors in judgment, and failures in crew monitoring. Basically, one crew member not catching another's mistake.
That IAF study also mentioned something about the helicopter operating environment being not so well defined and label. What's that about?
Yeah, they use those terms to kind of describe the unique challenges. Helicopter missions often happen in more dynamic, less predictable settings than, say, an airline flight between two major airports.
Like landing in tight spots or flying low.
Exactly. Confined landing zones, low-altitude flight where terrain and obstacles are big factors, dealing with rapidly changing localized weather, all that adds complexity and potentially risk. It's just a different kind of flying.
Okay, so we have these unique risks, human factors. What's being done to make helicopters safer? Are there specific efforts or recommendations?
Definitely. There's the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, or USHST. They're actively working on developing and promoting specific safety enhancements. They call them HSEs.
And what do those target?
They're really focused on the big killers: loss of control in flight, unintended flight into IMC, flying into bad weather you weren't prepared for, and accidents during low-altitude operations.
How do they promote these?
Through a mix of things: pushing for better pilot training, advocating for policy changes, encouraging companies to adopt new safety tech, and just doing a lot of outreach to pilots and operators.
And what about recommendations coming out of specific crash investigations, like the Kobe Bryant one? Did the NTSB suggest changes?
Yes, they made several key safety recommendations after that investigation. A big one was urging that Part 135 operators,
That's the category for charter services, air taxes, right?
right, those kinds of commercial operations. The NTSB recommended they should all be required to install flight data recording devices.
Like black boxes.
Essentially, yes, but specifically ones capable of supporting a flight data monitoring program, an FDM program.
What does that involve?
It means the operator would routinely download and analyze flight data, not just after a crash, but regularly to spot potential safety trends, deviations from procedures, maybe risky habits, before they lead to an accident.
That sounds like a really proactive approach. Has it been adopted?
Well, the NTSB has actually had to reiterate this recommendation, along with others, to the FAA. They've been pushing for mandatory FDM programs and the installation of crash-resistant recording systems that capture not just data, but also cockpit audio and images.
So they really want more data collection across the board.
They see it as critical for understanding why accidents happen and preventing future ones. And, the FAA does hold events like rotorcraft safety conferences, and the leadership emphasizes safety as a top priority. So there's a tension on it.
Okay, so wrapping this all up. After looking at the accidents, the stats, the causes, the efforts, what are the main things our listeners should take away when thinking about helicopter safety?
I think the big picture is this. Yes, those high-profile crashes are deeply concerning and raise valid questions. But it's crucial to look at the broader context.
Right.
Commercial aviation, statistically, has become incredibly safe, especially with modern technology. Helicopters operate differently, often in more challenging environments, and face unique risks, with human factors playing a significant role in accidents.
So it's not necessarily a simple yes or no on whether they're inherently dangerous, but more about the context.
Exactly. Our goal wasn't to definitively label one safer than the other in all cases. The specific type of operation matters hugely. A scheduled airline flight is very different from an on-demand helicopter charter or, say, emergency medical services.
And the pilot's training, the aircraft maintenance, all those factors are key.
Absolutely critical. They all contribute to the overall risk level of any given flight, whether it's a plane or a helicopter.
Okay. So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Yeah, perhaps think about this. How do those different operational contexts we just mentioned, scheduled airlines versus charter helicopters versus military ops, how do they shape not just our perception of the risk, but the actual statistical risk involved?
Good question.
And what role will technology, like the flight data monitoring we talked about, and evolving regulations, continue to play in making both types of flying safer in the future? It's a constantly changing picture.
Definitely something to think about. Hopefully this deep dive gave everyone some useful context and data to consider.